It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again, time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 263. Tonight I'm joined by Ammo.
Hello.
Ashgar.
Hello.
Kodra.
Hi.
Tam.
Hello.
Thalen. Okay. It'll get edited out, but man, that was a long pause. So we have a bunch of topics that rolled over from last week, plus some new ones that got added in, so I guess we'll start from the top. Warhammer's Old World finally put to rest.
Boo. Yes.
Oh?
Well,
I like the old world. I like it a lot.
So, Warhammer Fantasy Battles was not... It had problems.
Yes.
It had a whole lot of problems. And when they moved everything to Age of Sigmar, it wasn't elegant. They moved a lot of things over, but they didn't... A lot of the old factions were really tied to the old setting. So when they made a new setting, they didn't really make any sense anymore. And in the initial release of Age of Sigmar, they made even less sense.
Is this sort of like the weird lizard wizards from space?
No, those still fit pretty well.
No,
Yeah,
those actually
they're
still
great,
fit.
and we love them.
Yeah. No, this is like all of your regular human factions. All of your... Anything that was a classic fantasy faction, like dwarves or elves or humans.
Or Bretonnians, or...
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like all the human factions were countries. Like it was
Yes.
Bretonia or the Empire, so...
Oh, but none of those countries existed.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like the only way you got to play with all of them was like in an Empire United kind of scenario, which was like a special rule case.
Yeah. And Age of Sigmar didn't really help this much. They had all of these like weird fragmented mini factions. And so they've been going through and trying to clean up their game, clean up sort of the remnants of a game that doesn't work anymore in that setting. And one of the things that's been like glaringly missing has been you can play as like superhero tier, angelic knights.
Mm-hmm.
You can play as the old slayers are an entire faction now, and you can play as like dwarves with airships, and you can also play as like blood cult elves or undersea elves, and that's basically it. There's no coherent wood elves. There's no coherent regular human faction.
Right.
They're sort of like things that were thrown a bone, but not actually structured. So they're releasing a book that is Cities of Sigmar, which I'm actually pretty excited about, because what they've been going through and trying to do is go through a lot of the really fragmented, kind of broken up factions and turn them into something reasonable.
One of the things the initial release of Age of Sigmar did was it split every tiny little sub-faction into its own faction, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Even if that faction was not well supported?
Even if that
But,
faction
like-
was not actually legal to play in the given rules.
There were beastmen before, and then they became like 3 different separate armies until last summer.
Yeah.
But they've been going through and they've remade a Beasts of Chaos faction that includes all of the various beastmen and makes it so you can actually run them together instead of having to separate your bulls and your goats.
And they did the same thing with Skaven more recently, Skaven were kind of a hot mess. And
Several Skaven factions were not fieldable.
yeah. And now I think every still existing Skaven model is fieldable.
With
got
one
rid of
exception.
Yeah, with one exception.
There was one that was only in a box that was a box set with, high elves. And so that one's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, and a big problem with a lot of the old world units, especially some of the classic ones, were that you just couldn't get them.
Right.
There were entire units that were only available in, 1 2-player box set release in 2002. And like if you can find that box on eBay and it's like $500 for half of it because you just can't get it anywhere else.
Well, and weren't some of those also like Forge Worldable, which isn't exactly a great option?
They were until Forge World reorganized their catalog and got rid of a lot of it. Because like Forge World is always cycling its stuff. So even the Forge World stuff is like you can hunt on eBay for it. And so yeah, Cities of Sigmar is kind of, they've done it with parts of Chaos, they've done it with Skaven, and now they're going through the like human and elf and dwarf factions that were sort of a mess and collating them into one big, hey, this is the like regular people faction. And as a result of this, they're straight up removing, it's like what, 16, 17 units?
It was a large number.
It's a large number of units that just are redundant. And like there's a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth going along with it, which I get.
Mm-hmm. So like if you have those models, can you field them as something else?
Yeah.
Okay.
But instead of having, like, for example, I think dwarves, the old dwarves had 3 different melee units, and now they have 1.
Like they're keeping hammers, they're keeping iron breakers, but they're getting rid of one of the other ones. And they also got rid of thunderers, which I think is weird because that was the ranged dwarf unit.
Yeah.
But there are lots of ranged dwarf units currently in the game, as it turns out.
Yeah. And so what they're doing is they're saying, hey, this unit fills the hole of ranged dwarf unit. There are 3 other units that you can choose from that fill the role of ranged dwarf unit. We're not going to write separate rules for all of these ranged dwarf units. We're going to give you 2 or 3 instead of 6 and make those actually good and unique versus having this kind of soupy mess of these are all kind of similar with like maybe one little detail different.
Okay.
And then what they're doing in Cities of Sigmar is saying, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to have like, hey, here's a themed, or at least what I'm getting is here's a themed city. This is the city of dwarves. This city can use dwarves and dwarven allies. And instead of you having to go through all kinds of weird rigmarole to stick all of your dwarves together, you're like, no, my dwarves are this city aligned. Therefore, I can run slayers and my old regular dwarves and sky dwarves all in one place.
Okay, cool.
And then you can actually have like a unified dwarf army with all of your dwarf units because they have rules for that now, and dwarves aren't separated into like 3 sub-factions, plus the 2 ones that are actually supported by books. And the same is true of elves and humans. They're going through all of those. The biggest cuts are elves. It's something like half of the units that are being just removed entirely are elven, either high elves or wood elves, because they're just like these, and I don't know what they're doing with them, but they're like, these are redundant. They don't fit into this new structure.
So is there a lore thing for why the universe is, like, the old world is being destroyed? Like, is that the
that was
apocalypse?
the start of Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, that happened years ago.
Yeah, the end of sort of the last expansion book for Warhammer Fantasy was a book that was about the end times that like ended with the apocalypse. And the start of Age of Sigmar is we picked up after the apocalypse and rebuilt the world because a lot of this world was seeded from things from the old world.
Initially, with Age of Sigmar, there wasn't even really a world.
Yeah.
It was just kind of, there's armies out there and they fight somehow, somewhere. Exactly. It doesn't matter where.
And now they've sort of restructured it. They've restructured a lot of the story that's like, hey, so yeah, the apocalypse happened and the gods / most powerful beings took what they could and tried to save them, found a basically new series of planes of existence to settle in on. But whoops, it turns out that the Chaos Gods found them, and now they're fighting over these planes. And they've been going into more and more depth on like, hey, here's how the different planes work, and here's the kinds of things that go on, and like this is what trade between the planes is like. There are cities that there are cities that are like centered on a planar gate. So half of the city is in one plane and half of the city is another plane.
Sounds very Planescape.
Yeah, it's very like Planescape meets Ravnica.
Skaven, being weird, can just sort of tunnel between planes.
Yeah.
This also may have been how they helped cause the apocalypse.
Yeah.
When in doubt, blame the Skaven.
I mean, I would imagine, though, there's like a lot of players that are feeling, I don't know, like weird about it.
Oh, yeah.
Much like the whole Werewolf the Apocalypse and Werewolf the Post-Apocalypse.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Because like nobody likes when their favorite models get, well, I mean, the Warhammer community term for it is squatted because yeah. Whoops, sorry squats. You were a 40k faction and now you don't exist anymore. I give it a few years before they come back, by the way.
You think a few years?
You think sooner?
I think it could be next year.
Yeah, that's fair. They are very well, we talk about Games Workshop being under new management. They are very, very well aware that that the community really likes to bring up the old space dwarves, and they keep on releasing models for them for not 40k, but other games.
I was going to say, isn't there both a Necromunda got a space dwarf?
Yeah, Necromunda got a space dwarf. Blackstone Fortress got a space dwarf.
Oh, right.
And there's some other one that I don't remember. But yeah, they're definitely like, maybe they didn't all get eaten by Tyranids. So that's sort of interesting to keep an eye on. But yeah, a lot of the things that are being removed in Age of Sigmar are the like, these things were undeniably old world units. Like, what are they? The lions, the golden lions, white lions of Trace. They're like high elves with big axes. And those are just gone because there's no Trace anymore. There's no White Lions organization.
Yep.
It doesn't make any sense. And so they've been going through and consolidating that. But there were some interesting takeaways. They got rid of almost every elf unit that was still around, except for all of the dark elf units.
The Phoenix Guard are still around.
Yeah, Phoenix Guard are still around.
Which is weird. How do they exist without the High Elf?
That is a question for the book. I am going to be very interested to see how any of that makes any sense. They're finally allowing... also, a number of Wood Elf units, the more recent ones, are sticking around. It looks like what they did was, if it had a plastic box, like a modern... if it had a modern plastic box, they kept it. Which meant that a bunch of factions like Dark Elves had modern plastic boxes, so they kept them. And then presumably will be writing fiction to make that make sense.
I was going to say, aren't the Wood Elves the Sylvaneth, which are now just tree people?
It used to be, in the old world, it used to be Wood Elves and tree people fought side by side.
Aha.
Yeah, they were like your heavy units.
Yeah. And then, the Wood Elves were sort of your light skirmishers, because you can't have an entire army of just bow people.
Details.
They were really good scouts. An entire army full of really good scouts.
Pretty much. But you needed some kind of, like, tank. So, Sylvaneth. And the Sylvaneth storyline in Age of Sigmar is they're all tied to the land. When the plane that they had settled on got attacked by chaos, the Wood Elves were like, oh, hey, we could just leave and not have to worry about this. And did. And the Sylvaneth are like, are you kidding me?
Oops.
And so now the Wood Elves are not highly thought of among the tree people.
Yep. Because they abandoned them. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so they were able to do a faction that's entirely tree people, which is admittedly cool. But one of the things that they have said they're bringing in the book is a city that is Wood Elves and tree people.
So maybe they will reunite the faction?
Or at least offer a glimpse into the world in which maybe the faction isn't just 100% anti-Wood Elf. Like, hey, this is a different side of the faction that's like, hey, no, we understand. Or maybe, hey, we weren't on that plane.
Well, and like Warhammer Fantasy has always had fairly decent mercenary rules.
Yep.
And I have a feeling that all of these units that you want to field can absolutely be brought on as a mercenary unit.
They did just recently add good mercenary rules. They didn't have the Age of Sigmar yet.
Yeah, I feel like they're doing a lot of cleanup after decades of like white dwarfism.
Yep. Yes.
Where like a white dwarf would come out and it's got a hot new miniature in it, and here's some rules that we're going to cobble together at the last minute so that you can field this thing.
Yep.
And now we have to support it forever. I mean, I love my Adeptus Arbites, but they're not really a feasible unit ever.
Oh man, Bell, if you like the old Adeptus Arbites, Arbites? I don't know what that word. I never knew what that
I just say
word was.
Arbites because, like, I'm sure that's not right, but it's what works for me, and I can actually say it.
This week in
Space Cops.
This week in Games Workshop Miniature News, they announced a bunch of new Space Marine stuff. The newest Space Marine unit is really clear that they were pulling from the old Adeptus Arbites.
Yeah. I mean, basically, Adeptus Arbites are, we want to make a Judge Dredd miniature. That's it.
They're Space Cops. They're Judge Dredd.
Yeah. And they were like, hey, that turns out that's a cool design. Let's make that a unit. And they did.
I used to always field them with Sisters of Battle because it kind of made sense, but...
Sisters of Battle also getting a complete new faction rework. Like an entire new line of minis. They're doing a lot of long overdue cleanup.
With reasonable not 90s metal cover sculpts.
Yeah. I was actually chatting with a friend of mine who also plays, and his comment was, yeah, I mean, we were talking about something, we made a joke about how like the game is still has a bunch of flaws, and his follow-up comment was, yeah, but I actually trust them to put effort into fixing it if it turns out to be broken. And I can't believe I'm saying that. Because they release at worst a yearly update for everyone.
Well, and they've also been like better about tweaking things midstream, haven't they?
Yep, very much
better.
And like releasing errata.
Yeah, that's the other thing is they do errata. They have a regular schedule for it that they're pretty good about sticking to. The worst like release errata delay they had was that the Sylvaneth errata was available before the book was, because the books got stuck on a ship.
Whoops.
Whoops, UK trade deals with China. But yeah, it's been really interesting to follow it, and it's been fascinating to me to watch for 2 decades now, at least. Games Workshop had been kind of coasting and just like, hey, we're the biggest thing around, and if you don't like it, you don't have options. And they didn't have to try. And so a bunch of other minis games sort of cropped up in the meantime.
Well, in part, they became their own worst enemy. Like, people left Games Workshop to go off and create other, studios.
Right. And now, in the last couple of years, like Games Workshop has woken up and has, at a dizzying pace by miniatures game standards, revamped their 2 major games. They release a new specialist game every quarter basically now. Some of which are good and some of which aren't, and the ones that are good stick around and they support them. They actually have new waves of releases and talk about them in all of their marketing, and
even run tournaments for Underworlds.
Yeah, they have games where they run tournaments. And the entire rest of the minis gaming sphere is adapting. Because Games Workshop has the ability now to move at a really surprising pace, which is much faster. Like if you think about, you have like Magic cycles, and like in Magic, about every quarter or so, every 2 quarters, you can kind of shift the way the meta is working through the release of new sets. Possibly more often than that. I don't know what the exact release pace is.
So it's coming out every quarter, but they're not. They're planned very far in advance.
Yeah.
Well, and like to say they come out every quarter is like a bit of a misnomer, because like there's all the bonus sets that don't count for standard. But yeah, like standard changes every quarter. Yeah.
And it used to be that, and so it's like 4 times a year you're getting an update minimum. Minis games, it was like any given game is probably, if something is released and that thing is a problem, significant changes to that thing probably aren't happening until the next major book, which is like 2 years ish. Games Workshop has accelerated it to almost Magic speed at this point, where about once a quarter there's some significant release that corrects some issue or another, and that's just not a pace that minis games in general have ever tried to deal with. Some have been more successful at it than others. Although I think it's very telling that Infinity announced its new rules that are coming out next year, and well, War Machine and Hordes have kind of imploded. But yeah, it's been super interesting, and I'm excited to see all of the things that they're doing to make the game more accessible to people, more playable, and just across the board, just a more enjoyable thing to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is a comment you made on the podcast before, but like, I really do think it's interesting that they've shifted to making the game more accessible, and then all these sub games be where they do experimental stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, awkward segue time. Gloomhaven is a game that kind of is gunning for a part of the miniature games segment.
I mean,
because it definitely fits the whole Warhammer Quest model.
Oh yeah.
How's the computer game, Kodra? It's a very pensive
it's a thing.
A good thing or a bad thing?
Uh-oh.
So I had a lot of fun for the first 3 missions I did. It's basically you get to play Gloomhaven. You pick a 2-player party, and then you run them through a series of adventures. Not terribly strenuous adventures by any stretch of the imagination. And you do Gloomhaven battles. It's not the rich storytelling that Gloomhaven has. Currently, the only thing they have is a roguelike mode. But if you enjoy the act of doing adventures in Gloomhaven and selecting cards and setting things up and trying to execute on strategies, yeah, it's really fun. And then I got to level 2 and the entire UI broke. So I haven't played it since.
Well,
oh no. That's not good.
No, it was not good.
That's really not a lot of enjoyment there if it died at level 2.
Yeah, so I would say maybe wait on this one getting a couple of patches. I haven't loaded it up in a while, so I need to see if they fixed me.
So is this an early access?
This was like 3 weeks ago, right?
Yeah, this was 3 weeks ago. I imagine they have had to patch something like that.
I mean, is this early access or is this
Yeah,
like an
it's
actual
early
release?
access.
Okay.
It's early access. Nothing ever actually releases. But, as you like to say, Bell,
They
your
released
early
a broken
access
game.
release date is your release date.
Yep, they released a broken game. Congrats. That was all the hype you're going to get. I mean, and I get it. Like, I'm not going to belabor the point too much, but, if you need early access as a funding vehicle, then I absolutely get it. But, yeah, I think it's just going to cause more harm for a game in the long run.
So, I am not upset about my purchase because I think is going to get better. And what I did get to see was fun. It was a way for me to play an endless amount of Gloomhaven. And honestly, sometimes Gloomhaven, some games I play, specifically I'm thinking of Hexcel's Infinite. That game, it turns out, you really need to have a designer's hand at things when putting together the levels. I don't know that that's actually as true with Gloomhaven. Toss me a random couple of levels with a bunch of random mobs, and I'll probably be pretty happy.
Yeah, you can sort of throw almost anything of an appropriate level together, and it'll mostly work.
Yep.
Well, I mean, I think that's the difference of a game like Gloomhaven is it is by nature designed to work with random chance.
But yes, I was playing as the Cragheart and the Scoundrel and was having a lot of fun.
I mean,
That's
how
cool.
did the difficulty sync up to your expectations?
It seemed a little easy.
Okay.
I mean, there was one adventure that I was surprised when I realized I had a room full of enemies left, and that was a little bit of a stressor. But most of the fights were fairly simple. But Gloomhaven itself is not terribly challenging, and I think we've only failed maybe 20% of the time, maybe 15% of the time.
We've lost the last 3
We're
times.
on a bit of a losing streak, though.
Yeah.
It's true, we are. But I'm just saying, we were on a very long winning streak prior to that.
This is true.
It does feel bad to lose. It feels so bad to lose in this game. Like, and this is a problem with most games, is when it's like, oh, well, you just sunk 2 hours in and then basically no progress happened and it's time for you to try that again. That's not a good feeling.
I mean, it's basically like Diablo hardcore mode. I mean, you've spent a bunch of time and now it's over and you can't go back.
Well, and that's sort of the thing that is weird, because it's one of the things that I actually think is reasonably okay about the regular Gloomhaven is that you get at least some progress even if you lose.
You still get your XP, you still get your gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't get any of the story progression rewards.
That's true.
And that means that you have to try that again. And that was probably not a small amount of time investment that you just did. This is still better than, say, Kingdom Death Monster, which is like, oh, maybe your entire campaign is over now. I think it's different based on the way my play group is, because we only play once a week, and so any given failure is like a week's amount of time set back. I know my friends who play Kingdom Death Monster very seriously play it every other day when they're in a campaign.
That sounds like a lot of that game.
They really love that game.
I feel like that's the sort of thing that only works if you live with a person.
I guess it works pretty well for them. They live close to each other.
Okay. I mean, yeah.
But yeah, I would say that this is an early access game that needs a little bit more time to bake before I wholeheartedly recommend it, but I did see a glimmer of hope there. I did see a shell of something that I want to play.
It'll be interesting to see it evolve, because I was really looking forward to this because I don't really have a group to play Gloomhaven with, and I would like to experience it.
This will be good for that.
Yeah, same.
Gloomhaven is very cool.
Also, I have enough physical board games. I don't need to be buying more.
Especially not one that's
complicated ones.
that
It's such a huge box. Clearly, you can replace several other physical board games that you already own.
How many physical board games is too many physical board games?
I mean, this
Is
thing
there
is
such a number?
It not only is huge, but it also weighs a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually, you stop having places to put them. When storage becomes an issue.
So the thing that I ran into, the Gloomhaven box has an incredible organizer. Thank you to Ash for setting my copy up with one so that it's actually playable.
The one from Broken Token?
Yeah, the one from Go7.
The one from Go7. It's really, really great. The biggest problem I ran into is the size and
makes it heavier.
It does make it heavier. That's a problem. That's a very heavy box. But also, the lid of the box creates a nice vacuum seal once it's on. And so I had to actually drill some holes in the top of the box so that it could open and close for air release. Because at one point I went to put the top back on the box and I pushed it down and it started to float back up. And I was like, no, wait. It's not how that's supposed to work.
So, speaking of big board games, though, I went to Gencon last week, and I got to sit down and talk about a very, very cool board game with that's coming out sometime in the near future, and that's the Stellaris board game. There's actually 2 Stellaris board games coming out. One is a ship combat board game, but the other is a 4X board game, and the person who was the designer who was talking to me about it made a very apt comment in that 4X board games are frustratingly always both too short and too long. Because they are too long.
Yes.
If you think about it, they will take 8 hours to play through a proper 4X board game, and you still will not have gotten to spend enough time with your empire to really see it through the full progression. So what they're doing is they're turning it into a 4X living game, where every single time you play, there are a series of objectives you are trying to achieve for your empire. And at the end of each play session, You take all of the systems you have expanded to, all of the ships you have built, all of the technology you've researched, all of the stuff your empire has gathered in the course of play, and that you put it in a box. And the next time you play the game, you pull those boxes out and you set up your empire as it was.
That sounds like that would be a much more satisfying experience.
It means that you get to live with your empire for longer. You get to see it grow, and you get to see it in different phases. Also, because it's a Stellaris game, you have some interesting options. You can, at any point, decide that, hey, my empire isn't really working out, and let it become a fallen AI-controlled empire. So that's an option you have if you're far behind. And you might be thinking, well, wait a second, that seems bad. Wouldn't it be worse to be a fledgling empire versus all of these big, older empires? The win condition for the game is determined on how old your empire is. So older empires have a harder time winning than newer empires.
Huh.
And if you are an older empire that is just sort of running away with it, you might be forced to retire. Like, your empire might achieve its objectives and be forcibly retired from the game. Like, they may ascend, or they may decide to go off and become an agrarian society uninterested in the politics of the universe. But then you will probably get a choice that you get to make, and your empire will have influence throughout the rest of the game in another way. This sounds really cool to me, and especially the idea of 4X games in board game form, both being too short and too long, really resonated with me, so I'm excited to see what they do here.
I haven't played Twilight Imperium, because I'm told it takes all day. That's not really a thing I want to do.
Correct?
Yeah. I played Twilight Imperium once. And
Twilight Imperium also doesn't really satisfy it. It's still just like it doesn't let you fully engage with a expanded empire. That's what I'm looking forward to. It's just one of those things where I can play for 2 hours and I can come back and I can play it again for another 2-hour chunk, and I can grow this slowly over time.
So how often are you going to be asking the other players around the table for just one more turn?
Well, that's the thing, is each game has an end condition. But yes, hilarious.
It's weird. I might actually wind up liking Stellaris the board game more than Stellaris the video game, based on that description.
Yeah, I was super excited. Yeah, the Gencon vendor hall was massive this year. Like, it felt bigger than I remembered it being. This booth was tucked over in a corner next to the Kingdom Death booth, which was a thing, as it always is. Other show highlights from Gen Con this year was, I have to say, is True Dungeon. Like, I talk about True Dungeon every time I go to Gen Con, but this year I feel like they really knocked it out of the park with the scenarios they set up. Especially, so one of the things that they do is there is frequently supposed to be a GM per room that is arbitrating what's going on there and helping tell you when you are having success in solving a puzzle or when you're having failure and whatnot. What they did this year was, with one of them, they had a NPC that would follow you from room to room, and you would get to sort of know through the course of the adventure. And it made for a much more consistent experience, and it was super great. Like, it meant that we got to really get to know the GM that we were with and had a really good time. And there were some really cool things. Like, we traveled through a portal at one point, and I've never seen this before, but I guess these are a thing. They have, like, big inflatable balloon things on either side, and you have to sort of push your way through those. That did a good job of
that is entertaining.
Traveling through a portal to hell.
I've heard a lot of your True Dungeon stories, and I still am unable to generate a mental picture of this experience.
I'm really excited that we're going to be trying this.
So are you going to try it at PAX West?
Yeah, True Dungeon is coming to PAX West, and they opened up a bunch of new tickets.
I guess they're coming to PAX South this year too.
They've been PAX South last year.
Yeah, they've been to PAX South. It's just like like I remember, I think Ash and I did kind of like a walk by, but like the lines were massive.
I don't know if they were there the last year you were there.
I could have sworn the
definitely
very
had to
last...
get tickets ahead of time, and last year at least they were in a section of the convention center all by themselves. So it was impossible to walk by them unless you specifically were looking for them.
I was gonna say they took over basically the basement of Lucas Oil Stadium for Gencon. It was massive. They had 4 different adventures running.
How big is a stadium basement?
Big.
I mean, bigger than a stadium field. Like it's all.
That sounds huge.
Yes, it was massive.
Makes me wonder what possible venue they could have gotten downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so it's only they're
say.
only gonna need a quarter of the size.
I guess that's fair.
Because I believe they're only running Abyssal Swamp, which is luckily for me the one leg of the adventure that I did this year that I didn't get a chance to do. So they actually are a campaign series. This is the first of a 3-legged campaign, and actually this campaign is a much bigger story that I've been doing for the past couple of years, where we've been chasing this stupid Mind Slayer. Listen, wizards, legal, whatever.
You don't want to anger the scary wizard that lives on the coast.
You don't want to anger the scary wizard that lives on the coast.
I mean, probably worse so Hasbro. They have more lawyers.
Yeah, I'll have to figure out where this is going to be, but I'm sure they've gotten a rather large section of land. Other than that, it was just good to see friends again and do a couple of LARPs. It definitely felt like this is something that's been sort of an ongoing thing, but it really was cool to see how very aggressively like pro-inclusivity the con was trying to be. Like lots of people with rainbow shirts on, lots of people with ally pins on, lots of people with like trans safety pins on. It was good, and the people who I know are impacted by that stuff seemed very comfortable being there, and that made me feel great. Because it's always kind of like, whenever you are doing any sort of a nerd convention, it's like, what is the vibe like for people who are not me?
Mm-hmm. And historically conventions have been kind of creepy. So it's good that in recent years, like, explicit efforts have been made to prevent that.
It's going to be at the Grand Ballroom in Weston, Seattle, is where True Dungeon will be for PAX.
If I remember correctly, that's a reasonably large location. Actually, if that means they took over that entire section, then that's a very large location. They had multiple panels in that area last year.
That seems probably accurate, that they took over the whole section.
So we've had a topic on here for a bit about Pathfinder 2nd edition.
I mean, this just came out of Gen Con. This is a new topic. Newish topic.
I was going to say, this is the one thing I picked up at Gen Con and then realized that it put my luggage overweight.
That book
It's
is
a big book.
That book is distressingly huge.
That book is heavy.
It is bigger than the previous Pathfinder core rulebook, which I'm pretty sure is still the heaviest until this, was the heaviest rulebook I owned.
Pathfinder 2 is doing a lot of interesting things to how to play a D&D style D20 game.
Well, for starters, I have seen that popularity of D&D 5 is going up. Popularity of some more simplified rule sets would be desired, and they still want to have their own rule set to write modules for. That isn't just 3.5, and they want people to buy them. So yeah, new edition.
So one of the big things, from my perspective, that the new edition does is it completely blows up the action game. Because even 5 still adheres to sort of standard move swift action based economies for player, or what is it, bonus action, not swift action?
Yeah.
And one reaction. So the Pathfinder 2 solution is, well, why don't we just say every action is an action? So you just get 3 actions on your turn. You can use those to move, you can use those to attack, you can use those to cast spells. Actions are incredibly fungible in this system. But there's a whole lot more that you can use your actions for. And maybe it's not a good idea to just use all 3 actions to attack, because subsequent attacks get penalties applied to them. Maybe you want to attack and raise your shield. Maybe you want to attack and use Bard Song, or maybe you want to cast a fast spell so that you can move out of the way and attack. Or maybe you want to just stand still and use all 3 actions to cast a really big spell. These are all different options you have when you are playing this game. So I find the action system really interesting. It allows you to have very discrete actions your character has access to and know what they are, and then decide what you want to do on your turn. But that lets you have what I feel like are pretty good options and help diversify just the round-to-round combat. The other thing that's interesting is just how customizable your character is, and how they managed to do that without falling into the trap of, I think, a lot of other systems. So multi-classing is mostly gone. You can do minor multi-classing if you want to, but it's not the super extreme breaking of the game multi-classing that I've seen in other editions. But every single level you're going to have choices of what feats you're going to be taking. And those feats are going to sculpt your character. And you're going to get feats from a whole bunch of different areas. You're going to have a ancestry. So this is whether you're a human, a goblin, a gnome, a halfling. Those are going to have feats associated with them. You're going to have a background, whether like what you did before you became an adventurer. That's going to have some feat associated with it. You're going to have your class, which is also going to have feats associated with it. And you're going to eventually get skill feats, which augment the skills that you're taking.
One of the initial complaints when they showed the playtest was that the class layouts looked a lot like 4Es, and that you have like skill powers and class powers and things like that. But honestly, 4E didn't do everything wrong, and a lot of the things it did right, I think Pathfinder 2 borrowed from.
Yeah, if I am going to complain about one thing in 4E, it's that I felt like it didn't have a good non-combat encounter game to it. Mm-hmm. And that's where like the idea of skill feats is really exciting. You have all of these different skills that you're becoming variously proficient in, and you can also augment those skills to use them in alternative ways with skill feats.
Yeah, I've been flipping through it. I really like a bunch of the stuff it's doing. It's very interesting to see to sort of compare Pathfinder 2E to D&D 5, because it's sort of the obvious comparison to make. And it's definitely clear that the authors were indexing on different things.
Oh, yes.
And I find that really, really interesting. I find it really, really interesting to see. Because one of my first takeaways was I do not ever want to make a Pathfinder 2 character without app assistance.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Like, it's to figure out what you have access to and what you can take and what those things do requires like crazy hopping around in the book, and it's an RPG book, so the layout is not great.
Maybe someday an RPG book written by anybody ever will have a good layout. At least it's not Fantasy Flight.
I mean, it's not Palladium levels of nonsense where you have 7 books open on the desk, flipping back and forth between them, is it?
I'm sure it will be after, 2 years or so.
I was going to say, they've only released the one, so not yet.
So the Mensa Basic D&D book was incredibly well laid out. It also only had to cover 3 levels.
There you go.
But it is still the best job I've seen any role-playing game book do of introducing a new player to the game.
Yeah.
Because it didn't get to character creation until like page 40.
Yeah.
Like the first half of the book is basically running you through a solo adventure and introducing concepts one by one. And yeah, maybe that's something that they should consider in modern books.
Yeah.
It worked really well for me.
Well, I mean, and to some extent with Pathfinder, you kind of know what you're getting into, because it's not... Pathfinder has never really been a game... Like, they are not indexing on accessibility. They're streamlining a lot of things, but accessibility isn't like a core tenet.
I feel like the problem is nobody is indexing on accessibility these days.
I would say 5e does pretty well.
Well, that was where I was going to go with that, is that 5e is...
It does okay.
It does okay, but it's clear...
It still makes the standard assumptions of role-playing games have been around forever, and we don't need to introduce what this is and all of these words and things, which I would argue is wrong.
Right. No, I definitely agree. But it's also, I can also tell that the way 5e is written is they are trying to make it more accessible. They just have a very long way to go. And character creation in 5e is very streamlined and very accessible, to the point where people have a lot of criticisms about the first three, levels 1 and 2, and sometimes 3, depending on your class, of 5e are really boring.
I was going to say, most classes don't get to make any real decisions until level 2 or 3. Usually 3.
I feel very constrained in my decision making in 5e, and I had to I had to dip into multiclassing to feel like I was able to really make a character that was my own.
Yeah. But at the same time, the gap between a super well-built, optimized character and a character that is being put together casually is much smaller.
That's true.
You can actually have those two characters in the same game and have it work at all.
Right.
Which is definitely not the case in 3.5 or Pathfinder 1.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pathfinder 2 comes closer, but it's still, I don't think it's there.
No, I agree. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do.
But yes, there is a lot of cool stuff you can do. It's still the problem that some of it doesn't come online until level 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. But I don't necessarily mind that things don't come online until later levels, as long as there's either decent encouragement to start at those levels or progression is fast enough to get to those levels quickly.
I was going to say, the XP curve in 4 for those first 3 levels is super fast. 300 XP to hit level 2.
The XP curve in Pathfinder 2 is a flat line. Every 1,000 XP you gain a level.
But then how does it reward XP?
It rewards XP based on the level you are versus the encounter you're fighting. So, yes, and the encounter you fought at first level will give you less XP at second level. Because
we're doing third ed math again.
Everything is relative.
I like the Starfinder Society approach, where you can just go, you level up now.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've long ago abandoned XP in my games for milestones because it's much less of a nightmare to deal with. Probably to some extent to the chagrin of players I have that would very much like to bank a bunch of points in numbers on their way to the next level, but...
Meh.
I was going to say,
I've gotten over it.
I don't know if any of us are on this phone, on this podcast.
That's fair.
I know we're not the ones who habitually ask, so are we the next level yet?
It's true.
Calling you out, Elian.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, there's only one person that I
wasn't
know
gonna name
that
names,
specifically gives a recap after every mission. He likes numbers that go up.
It's fair. It's a reasonable thing to like.
Yeah, I like numbers that go up too. So.
Elian's interests might lean more towards the crunch.
I'm very excited that Goblin is now a just core race that you can play. That's going to be fun. I want to play a Goblin Paladin.
So there are for any new, like, depending on the setting, but for any fantasy RPG, I immediately there's a type of character I immediately try to make. And I'm usually disappointed. I like to try to make the skilled, subtle rogue mage. Like, I'm ideally like an illusionist or doing something clever there. All about subtle magic and being sneaky and being skillful. Most of the time, no RPG book has let me build this character. even the turbo crunchy ones like just aren't interested. You can play a arcane trickster that shoots lasers, that shoots sneak attack lasers, and that's technically all of the keywords, but it's not actually what I'm going for. Pathfinder 2 gets pretty close, like a lot closer than anything else has, and I don't have to be like level 12 for it to be a functional thing. So points in my book for that.
Nice.
You've heard me go on about player fantasy. The particular player fantasy I like is one that I don't often get a chance to play in like anything. So I always look for it.
I took a look at I can look at a few things. The Pathfinder Druid, like the previous Pathfinder Druid, was never a class that I was particularly enamored with because basically I just didn't like their wild shape mechanics. The Pathfinder 2 has slightly better ones, such that you can actually wild shape and do something that's reasonable even if you are a casty druid. If you specialize in it, you get a lot better. To a certain extent, it is hard to specialize in any one thing as a druid, though, so they sort of preserve that versatility. You're probably going to end up with more than one specialization.
Fits the class in concept.
Mm-hmm.
As a side note, when I was playing with it, I felt like I had to make a lot of decisions right off the bat.
Yes.
Like a terrifyingly huge number of them. What I don't know, and what is my sole remaining reservation is I've played other games where I've got to make a whole bunch of decisions right off the bat, and there's a lot of wrong ones. And Pathfinder 1 was terrible about this.
So one of the interesting things written into the book is the concept of retraining. You should be able to retrain most things about your character as time progresses.
Yeah, but I like retraining mechanics as you want to change the direction your character is going. They don't feel very good when it's, haha, you discovered that you made a mistake and now you've got to pay for the privilege of fixing it. Because I've definitely run into the thing in like 3.5, for example, where, you didn't take this feat at level 1? Well, you're just going to be bad until you get it and get through the progression, and you're just always going to be behind forever. And I don't know if that exists in Pathfinder 2.
Yeah,
but
I don't know either.
It'll be interesting to see. I don't know if it's, hey, here's a whole bunch of equally good things that you can choose from.
Seems unlikely.
Or if it's a WoW talent tree, where there's the illusion of choice, but there's actually a right answer.
I will say, from an initial look through the feats, I didn't notice any standouts.
Yeah.
You seem to get so many feats that they try to make all of them fairly low impact.
Yeah, and I like that. I noticed that too, and I like that. I didn't have the I had a lot of, this feat could be this or this or this, and I don't necessarily see any reason why any of those is like starkly better than the others. Like,
class feats are super important. General feats seem less so?
Yeah, general feats mostly seemed less important.
Yeah. And class feats are really straightforward. They're powerful, but they're really straightforward. You don't have to... It wasn't like, this feat is garbage, but it's a prerequisite for this other feat, which is also kind of garbage, but both of them together allow you to get to this feat, which is the one that is actually vitally important for your class. And there's no way
mobility, spring attack.
Right. There's no way to actually know that without meticulously mapping out all of your options. You just sort of get surprised when you're like, wow, why is my character bad? Oh, well, you should have this feat.
I guess that's another thing. I don't know if I haven't taken a very close look yet. Starfinder did not have any feat prerequisites more than 2 feet long, because they specifically knew about that problem and wanted to get rid of it.
Yeah. The thing that I do think is really cool are uncommon, rare, etc. feats and gear and so on. There are certain things that are theoretically possible for your character to have that are explicitly, this is less common.
Huh.
And one of the things that you can get as part of the rewards are, you get an uncommon thing. Is that an uncommon weapon? Is that an uncommon piece of armor? Is that an uncommon feat? Next time you get a feat, it can be an uncommon feat or a rare feat. And that's really cool for classes that like don't care that much about gear.
Yeah.
Or if you have like a particular specific thing that you want to be able to do. I didn't dig super deep into that, but the basic concept seemed neat.
Yeah, I didn't trip over that. I saw the common uncommon stuff, but I'll have to read up on that.
But yeah, I had the same reaction that Ash did when I looked, and it was like, none of this looked like, this doesn't look like there's any obvious standouts, you must have this.
There's no power attack hidden in here.
Right.
Yeah. No, power attack is a class feat now.
For fighter.
Do you want to be good at fighting things? Maybe you should be a fighter. You'll be very good at fighting things.
Yeah, they did a really good job of making fighter interesting.
Be a freaking dragoon if you want to. I'm not sure you always want to.
But if you're fighting a dragon, you probably want to. Probably want to bring that dragon down to the ground.
So yeah, there's a combination of fighter feats that lets you make a very high jump using your long jump PCs. And then if you hit something, bring it down to the ground.
Magic items also seem a lot less powerful, which is probably for the best.
I hadn't even looked at those. I got stuck on the very, very long spell section.
So one of the things that I was looking for is how do you buff your stats to outrageous numbers? Because that's a thing you would do in 3.5 and Pathfinder 1. The only way you can buff your stats that I have found is with a level 17 item that gives you +2 to a basic stat.
Wow.
That's definitely a change.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay with it too. That said, your magic sword and your magic armor can be really interesting. Better just learn how to carve the right runes into them.
Wait a sec, what?
So
just like Starfinder weapon fusions?
Kind of. So you have a potency rune, which gives you +2 to hit. You have a striking rune, which increases the number of damage dice your weapon deals. And then you have ancillary runes, which are limited by your potency rune.
Those sound backwards.
What?
Potency striking should be bonus to hit. Potency should be bonus to damage.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So you can have a +1 striking longsword, which would mean it would have +1 to hit, and it would deal 2d8 damage. Or you could have, and then, because you have a +1 weapon, you could have a +1 striking flaming weapon, which means it deals 2d8 plus d6 fire damage.
It's like, God, what is that game that had it's like Dragon Age.
Enchantment?
Yeah. Enchantment. I really like Dragon Age's, like, weapon augmentation enchantment stuff. It's cool it sounds like it's something similar here.
Yep. And similarly with your armor, you get +2 to AC and bonus DR. Damage resistance is a big thing in this game, especially if you have a shield. Shields are very cool. Or if you're a wizard and you cast shield.
I was going to say, that's still your reaction to take it on your shield, but it's not like you have an attack of opportunity reaction, so whatever. Oh yes, not everyone has attack of opportunity. Maybe you should be a fighter.
And there's no combat reflexes, which was the first thing I checked. Because that would have been a mistake on their part. Because your reflex is very important.
Is there anything that gets you an extra reaction in this game?
Not that I've seen.
There's definitely been a crackdown on attacks of opportunity that are out of control in recent RPGs. They're like, oh, this breaks the action economy. No, stop.
Yeah, I still liked 5e's version, in which you can AOO somebody who is entering your reach and cause them to stop moving, possibly out of reach of you.
Yeah, but then you can't stop the second guy.
It's true, you can't, because you only get one reaction.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable. It's not the meme where
it's not the spike chain plus combat reflexes.
Yeah, a classic, but it's good that we're done with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a couple of topics that should go really quickly that are bumps from last week. First off, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 has been released, and it actually came out like mid-July. Hey, Thalen.
It took us a while.
You liked Marvel Heroes, right?
I did.
This is probably the closest we're going to get to Marvel Heroes.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it.
I mean, it's pretty fun. It's
the last two games are good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so far it's been really fun. There is a moment in the game where, like, just a few minutes into the game, where I think they're absolutely playing an homage to Marvel Heroes. Because, like, you're with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Rocket said he just tweaked the scanners to pick up, like, Uru artifacts and cosmic cubes, and, like, rattles off a whole bunch of the things that were, like, the chase items from Marvel Heroes. So, like, they kind of won me over at that point. Like, yeah, if you're going to honor this game that I loved, I have not gotten terribly far into it because reasons, but all in all, like, it seems like a really solid game. You unlock a bunch of characters you can play with pretty quick. So, like, you're not really locked into the Guardians, for example, as your main party if you don't necessarily want that.
That's good.
Probably within the first 15 minutes, I'd unlocked, I feel like, most of the characters. And they're planning on releasing packs periodically of new characters, so, like, I really have a feeling that this is as close as we're going to get to a Marvel ARPG. And the other topic I have is, by God, will somebody read House of X and Powers of 10 so that I can talk to somebody about it?
I'm sorry. I don't think I have the brain energy for a Jonathan Hickman story right now. Like, he's really, really good, but his stuff is so complex and convoluted.
Oh, dude, I understand. Like, so, I mean, I can't go into details because I know at some point you will read this. But I'm 3 episodes in, and it's a 12-episode arc, and in episode 3, basically everything we've ever known about the X-Men has changed.
It's a
straight
Jonathan
up
Hickman story, so yes.
Right, like everything you thought you knew about a character is different, and it's not the character you might think of. But it's like a pivotal shift in everything we know about mutant kind.
So is this a comic we're talking about here?
Yeah, I keep saying episodes, but yeah, it's a comic. Basically, there's 2 miniseries that are interweaving, and it is going to change the face of Marvel Mutants. And at Comic-Con, they announced a bunch of new team comics that are going to appear post this event at the beginning of next year. And, like, the first thing that really got me interested is there's a Excalibur team that has Apocalypse on it.
Right. I mean, that better be Evan.
Yeah, like, I mean, I don't know. I do not know.
Like, my assumption would be that that's Genesis, and if it is, he'd still better be the goodest boy, and yeah.
I am not so certain. Just saying, I am not so certain.
Genesis is the clone of Apocalypse that Phantomix stole and had raised in an artificial world where he was effectively raised by the Kents.
I mean, I understand.
And he is good and wonderful, and
I'm not 100% certain that's the Apocalypse we're talking about here.
Needs to be.
I mean, some shit is happening. Like, but the crux of the story, like, that you get in the first couple pages, is that the mutants have once again decided they are tired of human beings and that they are forming a homeworld.
Because it's worked out so well the last 8 times.
And Charles Xavier has spent all this money and effort on building what is effectively like a couple of super drugs. And the catch is he will give these super drugs to any nation that accepts Krakoa as the mutant homeland.
Like, I already can think of 3 things wrong here.
Only 3?
I mean, from that one sentence, yes.
I mean, Krakoa is a mutant living island.
That's one of the things. Xavier's involved, bad idea. Krakoa,
but like literally,
bad idea.
That's the first couple pages of House of X.
So I'm curious because I grew up with like 90s X-Men, and Xavier was the leader of the good guys.
I mean, he's always technically been the leader of the good guys. It's just that
he doesn't make good decisions.
Yes, Xavier makes bad choices. It's not that he's a bad person. He makes bad choices.
He makes bad choices for the right reasons, but they're still bad choices.
Yes.
Something, Urianje.
Like, honestly,
Genosha was a thing.
So much. The 90s was Xavier, like, at his best, in all honesty.
But, like, really, if you think about it, Xavier and Magneto have always been 2 sides of the same coin.
Yes.
And this is a comic where they're working together.
Look,
So, yeah.
That, yeah.
But basically, there's a comic releasing every Wednesday until next year as it plays out a 12 comic arc. And it is super good. And each time one of these is released, like, I read it over lunch on Wednesday, and then I have a conversation with somebody else at the work that, like, also has done this thing and is mind blown. But I would say this is probably a story arc that would be the equivalent of Days of the Future Past.
Hopefully this will be the massive change to the X-Men that actually works and sticks around. Because I feel like they've gone through a bunch of those in recent years, trying to figure out what to do with them.
I have a feeling that this is going to be shifting up the teams enough to bring it into the Marvel Universe, or the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this will signal a sequence of events that will set the stage for mutants in phase 5, since phase 4 has already been identified. But I would greatly appreciate it if either Ammo or Thalen start reading this damn thing so I can have somebody else to talk about it. Just saying.
Just saying, okay.
We'll see if they still have any copies by the time I get into the comic book store.
Okay. This is probably also another really quick topic, even though we're running out of time. But I think there's been, like, pauses tonight. So, Thalen, tell me about Gundam Mobile.
It is a mobile gacha game.
what if Gundam Breaker was a gacha game?
Yes, you are a high school student who gets shanghaied into the school's Gunpla Club because they really need people. And so you're building Gundams out of parts of various Gundams and fighting with them. And the combat's okay. Like, it's, reasonably good controls for a mobile game.
It is better than New Gundam Breaker.
That's basically what the impression that I've gotten is at least it's better than New Gundam Breaker.
It's kind of a low bar.
It's a very low bar. It is not as good as Gundam Breaker 3.
Right. This actually led to me ordering Gundam Breaker 3 a couple of days ago, so that's supposed to arrive tomorrow. But
Is
is
Gundam Breaker 3 the one that I've been playing? That one was very good.
It's the one where you have to order the Singapore version.
Yeah, that one is super good.
The conceit of the game is real weird.
Yes.
But it's fun.
That's also the case here. Did you know that apparently in Japan, if you are going to fail your exams, you can instead compete in a Gundam tournament, and that counts for passing grades in your classes, according to this game.
I don't think that's how Japan works.
I mean, it's how it works in my mind. It's always worked that way. Just like England works, that if you somehow mess up in school, you can win with a wizard duel by saving, people.
That was basically the premise of one of the chapters, is the girl who recruited you into the club hasn't been studying enough, and she's going to fail. But if you guys win this tournament, she totally will get a passing grade, because reasons.
Wow.
I mean, it makes sense.
But yeah,
why wouldn't it make sense?
The gacha mechanic is not the worst I've seen. You get a free pull every 24 hours. It's 1,500 Haro chips for a 10 pull, and that's guaranteed to give you at least one 3-star or better. I don't think I've done a 10 pull that didn't have at least 3-star or better. So that's fairly reasonable. That said, the highest rarity level you just can't get as pulls. You have to upgrade lower level equipment to it, which takes various stuff that you get from spending event tokens or various things. The chips have been coming reasonably fast. In part, that's because they've been giving people lots of chips to apologize for the game not working properly in recent days. So yeah,
that'll happen.
They started up the asynchronous PvP arena, I want to say 4 days ago, and 2 days later they shut it off because nobody could log into the game.
Whoops.
I have to say, it turns out I am extremely, when it comes to those gacha style games, I am extremely willing to be forgiving when they're giving me a bunch of free stuff because things went kind of a little bit wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's true. At this point, I've done I've not spent any actual money on this game. I don't plan to. I have at least one 3-star item for every slot, And in fact, now I have at least one 3-star item for every slot that is not Bear Guy. Because for a while, that was the only torso, the only torso I had better than 2 stars. So my Gundam looked really dumb, and it had a little stubby tail.
Bear Guy is basically just the Zagok or whatever it is, it's fancied up a little bit.
Yeah, like here's a teddy bear Gundam. Okay. I'm not sure what I think about the way they're doing event tokens. So like, the first event is running now, and of course, is simultaneous with a capsule pool that there's a couple of Gundams that you have a higher chance of getting their parts, and it's Exia and I forget the other. But then there's missions associated with the event that you do, and you can get event tokens from them. Normally you get either 3, 6, or 9, depending on the difficulty of the mission. If you have at least one part from one of the 2 Gundams that the event is themed around, you get either 5 times or 7 times as many tokens.
That's a large number.
Yes, it is. So basically, if you didn't manage to pull any parts from either of these, you're getting like almost no tokens and can't buy much of anything from the event store. If you did get an Exia piece, and I did get the Exia weapon, then you're getting plenty and you can buy lots of stuff. And it's just like, I feel like 5 times and 7 times is a bit much. I feel like maybe they should have increased the base level and made it maybe 1.5 times and 2 times. But I don't know. Like, I can see myself in a future event either not being able to, just not having chips to pull, or getting very unlucky and getting cranky and quitting the game. I don't know.
I feel like so far I've played a bunch of these, and the one that it feels the most fair is still Dragalia Lost, because like there's a good enough cadence of releases to where there's always something slightly new or something you haven't done in a really long time coming just around the corner, and you're getting enough tokens to where you're getting like a 10 pull fairly often.
Yeah.
And if you don't get 5 stars, you're getting enough of the whatever the hell the water stuff is to upgrade your 4 stars into 5 stars.
You are now. Previously, the consolation reward was very bad.
Yeah, like that is an adjustment they have made, and I fully expect to see adjustments made in the Gundam in this one to some of that stuff, because some of what's necessary to upgrade your stuff just seems a little unreasonable. Like, equipment has levels, and so you can get some XP on it to level it just by doing missions, but that's really slow. You can use other equipment of the same type to level it up. But then also, each piece of equipment has some special ability, either an active or a passive. The only way to level that up, and of course it has levels, is to fuse another of that exact same piece to the equipment in question. The number of levels increases as the rarity of the piece increases. And of course, the best equipment is would be 4-star upgraded to 5-star, because that's something I've seen a lot of people annoyed about. That even if you were to upgrade a 1-star all the way to 5-star, which you can, it's not going to be as good as a 4-star that was upgraded to a 5-star. On the other hand, you can get lots and lots of 1-star duplicates of that thing, and so max out its special ability. Whereas a 4-star, you're going to have a hard time getting enough duplicates to increase the power of its ability very much.
Dragalia Lost has a similar issue, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, 3 stars upgraded to 5 stars are nowhere near as good as base 5 stars, or even 4 stars upgraded to 5 stars.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember in Dragalia, unless there was like a particular reason, like the ability that particular character had, mostly you wanted to go with when possible, you wanted to go with native 5 stars.
And you can kind of fix that a little bit now with the bonus items that you can apply, but again, a 5-star will always be better than a 4-star upgraded to a 5-star. Because there's like ways that you can buff the health and the power just infinitely, seemingly.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like even though that was the case in Dragalia, like it wasn't such a huge difference that it just made the lower rank ones absolutely worthless. Here the difference seems to be pretty stark.
Well, once the podcast is officially over, I know what I'm going to be doing tonight. I am going to be downloading this on my tablet and playing it. Because that is how I play most mobile games now, is on a
Mhm.
Samsung tablet. Well, we have gone well over at this point, but, we've at least cleaned the slate, which may or may not be a good thing. Just means we have to come up with more to talk about next week. So hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again next week. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you.